Great, and welcome to Round the Table. It's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ben John from Christian Concern. Always a joy to be with you on Round the Table on our Friday lunchtime live streams. Do put in the comments where you are. Say hello. It's always a joy to see you. Hi, Adina. Hi, Jansen. Hi, Andrew. Always great to see where you guys are and joining from, and Shalonda and Lloyd. If you're tuning in, do make sure you put in your comments and your questions. That would be it's great. We always love hearing from you and engaging with you. Delighted today to be joined by Steve Beegoo, Tim Dieppe, and Paul Huxley as we consider some of the issues from this week. We're going to be thinking about the government guidance on gender questioning children in schools, prayer bans in Michaela School, and whether Christians should attend an LGBT wedding. Hi, Steve. Hi, Tim. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Ben.
Good to see you all.
Wonderful. Steve, let's come to you. The government are currently consulting on their guidance for gender questioning children. Tell us about that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben. It's great to be with you today on this Friday afternoon. Well, there is finally some new draft guidance that has come out. It's important to realise that schools have been socially transitioning children, even primary school children, to a new gender identity that they believe they have. Now, imagine if some new guidance were to come out that was to say primary school age children should not have different pronouns to their sex-based pronouns used about them. Imagine. Teachers across the country have been rapidly changing pronouns, names, and school records, even without informing, let alone discussing with the parents. Now, imagine if there was some new guidance that was to come out that would say decisions should never be taken in haste or without the involvement of parents. Imagine guidance like that. You know, head teachers, this is the situation. Head teachers have been told by Stonewall, mermaids, just like us. That's not saying just like us. That's the name of another organization. Educate and Celebrate. That's another one. Head teachers have been told that they have an equality duty to obey the law in affirming a child's gender identity. Imagine some new guidance coming out that says there is no general duty to allow a child to socially transition. Imagine if it said gender identity is a contested belief. Well, those three things I've asked you to imagine, you don't have to imagine because of our work and others, a huge corrective could be being made. I say could be being made if such draft new DFE guidance is actually confirmed. It's not everything we need, but it's a good step. And I'd say, Ben, to our audience, those listening, we need you to respond to this consultation because you can bet those other organisations will be. So, yeah, that's basically what's happening there, Ben.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And so with that, how, when you say it's confirmed, so at the moment it's just being consulted on, it's draft guidance, so it's not confirmed yet.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, so being draft guidance, what they're doing is they're giving it a pretty reasonably long consultation period until March the 12th, whereby schools, parents, organisations can respond to what's been written in that draft guidance. I've got a copy of it here. It's been scribbled over and read multiple times as we've been thinking through what we want to encourage our supporters to say, and also what we will be saying ourselves on what's in this guidance. But again, many are encouraged because it's not the kind of things that have been written in black and white before. Yeah. There's been quite a tussle, let's say, between the Equalities and Women's Minister and the Department for Education, Gillian Keegan. They've been kind of toing and froing about what should or shouldn't be said in this. And thankfully, Kemi Badenoch, I believe, has been successful wanted into this document. Sadly, it doesn't ban. I mean, this is a really key issue. It doesn't ban social transitioning of children in schools. I mean, that is a big deal, and there needs to be changes in the law around that, so that this is not something which remains an option.
I think it's important to recognise, isn't it, that Nigel and Sally Rowe, Christian parents, Clients of Christian Concern, complained about 6-year-olds being able to cross-dress in their son's Church of England primary school back in 2017, I think it was, or was it 16?
Yes.
And they kicked up a fuss about it, and the church, the school wasn't interested, and then the church wasn't interested, and then the government wasn't interested, and then they ended up pursuing the government for judicial review as to why they weren't prepared to take any action on this, and the government settled their case and promised to bring out guidance. And this guidance says that primary school children should not change uniform, should not be allowed to change uniform and switch into uniform of the opposite sex. So they've been completely vindicated by this guidance. It's a fantastic result for them. Now, let's bear in mind, it is draft guidance, and we do need you to respond to the consultation, and we have got guidance for how to do that. And I think the link has just been put up on the chat there. Please do take some time in this coming week. It will take about, it took me 40 minutes, half an hour or so, some people an hour. So it's not a quick 10-minute thing, but it's really worth an investment of time if you want to protect your children, other people's children in schools, and basically agree with this guidance, but also encourage the government to strengthen it even more. And that's really what our guidance informs you how to do.
It's great to see that comment there from Nicole, who says she's going to do this after we go live. Thank you for saying that. I want to underline what Tim says there. This isn't a short consultation. This is quite a long, meaty thing to do. So I think it's really just important to refocus on the reasons. One of the things this guidance says is that Christians, well, not Christians specifically, but teachers shouldn't be forced to use pronouns that they don't believe in, which is another really important thing relating to lots of our cases. But going back to that case of Nigel and Sally Rowe, we spent ages looking for the experts who could testify on this point, worldwide experts on what happens when you socially transition a child. And the evidence is there on our website for all to see. And it just brings about so much harm, because you find that once you start pushing someone down that path of believing they're born in the wrong body and start affirming them in this new identity that isn't true, you find that they nearly always go on to the next step, puberty blockers, then on to the next step, cross-sex hormones, and all the kinds of damages that those come with. So this is really about protecting children. And I would really encourage people to look at what we've got on our website and to respond.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind, presumably, there's going to be others responding to the consultation who take a different perspective to what we're doing. And a government's not bound by a consultation, but I think it would be a powerful witness if there were huge numbers of responses saying, we support the direction of travel, please tighten it up further. So I think it's worth bearing in mind, it's easy to say someone else is going to respond. Well, the someone else might be the LGBT campaigners, various LGBT education charities. It's important that we as Christians who are
you can, I'd just like to emphasize as well, you can sort of save your response and come back to it later. If you can't commit to that amount of time, or something you want to just kickstart responding, start this afternoon, go ahead and do that, and you can come back to it and just take it in the slots, whatever. But it's well worth doing.
It is, yeah. I just add in, as soon as this draft guidance came out, already in the news and in reports, you have schools and teachers and unions saying, "Oh, this is just non-statutory guidance. It's only in draft form. We're just going to carry on as normal. We're just going to carry on as usual. We're not actually going to take note of this. We know how to handle issues with children and their parents." And I just say that already demonstrates the level of challenge that there has, even in getting this properly confirmed, because there's so much practice that's happened, particularly since the introduction of relationship and sex education, when a tsunami wave of resources and gender identity ideology infused curriculum was pushed into schools, it's gone so far that it's going to be significant egg on people's faces when they realize we're harming children, and the government are telling us we're harming children, but we're now going to say we're going to crack on anyway. And so there's significant need for there to be clear voice being spoken to say this is not acceptable. And if you hear of any school that's saying, oh, we don't need to worry about that guidance that's there, that new draft guidance, then I think those schools themselves are being highlighted as particularly dangerous locations for children, particularly if you're a Christian parent who has sending their children to their local school. You need to be listening to what those schools are saying about this draft guidance. And I'd encourage you to ask them, what do you think about this new draft guidance? What are you doing in terms of your relationships and sex education policy review? Are you reviewing things on the basis of this new draft guidance? What plans have you got in place to review your curriculum? These are also very important things which parents particularly can do.
Well, there's another pressure on schools, isn't there? This week, I believe Mermaids have put out guidance to supporters on how to write to their school and say you need to ignore this guidance, basically. I believe they've done this week. So people are going to be saying that, and you need to be the counter voices looking out for these people.
No, wonderful. I think that's helpful. So yes, we as Christians need to be responding, maybe encouraging, raising awareness about this amongst Christian teachers as well. Hopefully they would be aware of it. But I think it's important to see as well the way we mentioned earlier, protecting teachers and other children's, their consciences, not being compelled to use pronouns and things like that. I mean, if this does proceed, Lord willing, it really does have a big impact, and we can hope and pray that particularly impacts on some of our cases. We mentioned Nigel and Sally Rowe. There's been Joshua Sutcliffe, who, many years ago was disciplined for doing things that would be in line with the draft guidance at the moment. I think it all kicked off when he said, well done, girls, to a group of girls. And that's explicitly mentioned as one line and an example in the guidance.
Page 13, Ben, page 13.
Page 13, it says, teachers should be allowed to say, well done, boys, well done, girls, if one member of the group identifies as someone of the other. They shouldn't be disciplined. And so a direct reference to Joshua Sutcliffe's case, you can read about his case there. So it really is important. But as you've said, Steve, only draft guidance at the moment. So let's all get in, respond to that consultation. Yeah, as Tim said, can take a little while, but you can save it. I paused and went back to it, and you can submit it over the weekend and beyond, up until I believe a date in March for the closing deadline. 12th. That's right. March the 12th is the closing deadline, but don't leave it late. Just why not get it in and encourage others to fill it in. Thank you. I guess as we're thinking about schools, one of the other big stories recently has been about the Michaela School and an alleged ban on prayer. Tim, tell us about that.
Yes, so the Michaela School, run by famously Catherine Babalsing, famously regarded as the strictest head teacher in the country, but also like the best school in the country on the Progress 8 measure, which is a measure that a lot of schools refer to, that refers to whether children have progressed in their grades through the time at school. Best school in the country for that. Found themselves in court this week because a pupil is suing the school for not allowing them to pray. Now, this is an Islamic Muslim pupil. The pupils were starting to organize prayer meetings in the playground and shaming other pupils or pressuring other pupils to participate and causing division and some tension in the school. So the school said, no, you're not allowed to pray in the playground like that. And the result was some mayhem. They actually had a serious bomb threat to which police were called and caused the school to close 2 days early at the end of term. They had glass bottles thrown over the school railings and a brick actually thrown through a teacher's window, leaving teachers fearing for their lives at this school. And this pupil has now brought this case with legal aid against the school for discrimination for not allowing prayer. Very significant case, I think. I mean, I support the school. I think the school should be allowed to say, no, we're not going to allow this kind of prayer. it's divisive. You're creating a culture where you're separating people and pressuring people to go along with it and so on. I think the school should be allowed to stop this kind of prayer and say no, and particularly when there's so much bullying and harassment going on around it. This case is going on in court at the moment. It'll be a very, very interesting judgment to see what happens on it. Will they support the school or not? And the judgment will have very serious implications for schools generally. But there's a lot of pressure from schools like this, where there's a high Muslim population. About 50% of the school is Islamic, to conform to Islamic ideas. We found out this week that another school, primary school in London, had a bomb threat as well, because this time the school wouldn't allow pupils to wear pro-Palestinian badges on their uniform, and that resulted in a bomb threat. And of course, we've had many other examples. The teacher at Batley Grammar School is still in hiding for showing cartoons of Muhammad in a lesson about free speech. He's trying to teach them about free speech. We had those pupils who had police come into their houses because they dropped a copy of the Quran, which was their own personal possession, as if the police should be involved in anything like that, but they did. We had another school that refused to allow primary school children to wear a hijab, and after a lot of pressure ended up backing down, even though the government didn't want them to. So it's a real battleground, a real cultural battleground, particularly in Islamic areas of the country, or areas where high Islamic population, where schools are facing the pressure of aggressive Muslims who want to really bring in Islamic culture there. And this is a very interesting example, because it's a very high-profile school anyway, and it'd be very interesting to see how the court case goes as we watch it, and see what the result is.
Great, thanks, Tim. So can you just clarify, this isn't, I think some of the media reports presents it as some kind of, this school is particularly targeting Muslims, but because the context really is, as you said, that they didn't have prayers, there wasn't space. Some prayers did get brought in. It caused division and a rising militancy within the school. And that was why they then withdrew the provision that there was, which is a kind of blanket provision.
That's right, Ben. Well, I mean, Catherine Babal Singh explained in an interview on Heard the background to this. I mean, she's very, very clear. She wants all the pupils to mix and integrate and be together. She had thought about the food issue. We've got Muslims who want this kind of food, Hindus who want this kind of food, Jews who want another kind of food, and so on. And they decided, well, the one way around this is just to all be vegetarian, then we could all just eat together. And you can sort of respect that in a way. That's that's a decision. That's a particular cultural school that she wants to have. And they had Muslims asking for prayer rooms early on in the days of the school started. And they decided that no, they didn't have enough classroom space to provide that. Potentially half the school wanted to engage in this. And so they weren't going to provide classroom space for it. And initially they said, if you really want to go and pray, you can go and pray in the yard. And nobody did for about 8 years, until just this last year. Some pupils did start doing it, and it caused division and pressure and harassment of other pupils for not engaging in the same kind of thing, or not engaging in the same way as they were wanted to engage in it, and so on. And so they said, well, no, we're not going to allow this then in that case, because it's too divisive and goes against the ethos of the school, which is very much for everyone to integrate. And I think that's right. I think they should be allowed to make that decision there. And say, no, we're not going to allow you to go and do this in a way that causes people to separate and be divisive, and basically is trying to bring in an Islamic culture more strongly into the school. And former Islamist Ed Hussein has said this is exactly that kind of playbook. What Islamists try to do is to gradually infiltrate and bring in Islamic culture more and more. And here's one step of it, and it needs to be resisted. And the school is right to resist it, and it'll be very interesting to see whether the courts back up the school in that resistance.
I think it's just worth dwelling on the point, bomb threats.
I know.
Bomb threats to a school. In other words, we're going to put a bomb in your school where there are children in order to try to persuade you to do the thing that we're wanting you to do. This isn't a kind of governor's complaint that's being raised about whether or not there's space for Muslims to be able to pray. No. This is bomb threats. So this is, and the schools, when it started, they had about 30% of the pupils there in this part of London who were Muslim, and for 8 years they were able to. I mean, I've met Catherine Burblesing. She's an amazing woman. I've got a huge amount of respect for what she's done, especially with the results from the school in that part of London. And she created an environment where 30% of the school who were Muslim to start with, they were very happy for those first 8 years with the way in which she'd been approaching the school. It's gone up. So I think it's not like Tim said. It's like near 50% of the school is Muslim now. And so you can see what has happened is others have come in and thought, actually, we want to change this place. We don't like the way in which this is working. We want it to be more Islamic in a certain way. And
it's worth adding as well, Steve, that this particular pupil who's brought the law case was suspended last year because she apparently threatened another pupil with stabbing them, and also is said to have told other pupils, "I'm going to bring in a case to harm the school." I mean, she has got malicious intent. It's clearly malicious intent. And the school is quite rightly standing up to it and should stand up to it and should resist it. And I really hope the courts back up the school in that.
So I guess a quick question, because I think maybe Christians might hear some of this and they might think, but wouldn't we as Christians want to be able to defend freedom of religion and isn't it I've forgotten the saying, double-edged sword? In a sense of Christian freedoms as well. How can we respond to that?
Well, I think Christians will want to be allowed to hold prayer meetings and so on, but not in a way that is divisive and is intimidating and is threatening and is pressuring other pupils and is and threatening if you don't do it and wanting to bring a case to harm the school and all this kind of stuff. That is absolutely not what any Christians would want to do and ever have done, as far as I'm aware, in any school anywhere up and down the country or even in the world. This is not the way Christians behave. So schools will be much more likely to allow a peaceful, quiet Christian prayer meeting to go ahead, or for Christians to just gather peacefully in the playground and pray without any intimidation or pressure of other pupils to join with that. Why not? They can do that, or they can pray in their heads quietly anyway, and nobody can stop that. But this is about them laying out a mat or a coat as a mat and making a public show of it and pressuring other pupils who don't go along with them to do it. And that is divisive, and that is trying to shift the culture, and that is something the school is quite right to resist.
Go, Paul.
This is one of the problems with thinking of everything in terms of equality. And we've had this week an interesting piece by Miriam Cates in the Telegraph going back to the Equality Act and how it's kind of caused some of these sorts of problems all the way back from 2010. And when we just make kind of very basic comparisons between two things like Islam and Christianity in that case, Islamic prayer and Christianity case, and thinking about it in terms purely of equalities just flattens all of the distinction between what is going on with Islam and what's going on with Christianity. And you get it similarly in anti-terrorism type situations where extreme Islam and extreme Christianity are treated as if they are the same thing and will have the same outcomes. And so that's one thing that Christians need to really think about, whether we are elevating equality over some other things we need to think about.
And what I would say is that schools are places of worship. You always honor something more highly than other things when you have a school environment. And there is still a law in this country that says every school, every state school should be having a daily act of Christian worship. The Christians are the ones that started the schools, because rightly, children are supposed to be being led to Jesus Christ, to his word, to worship of him, because he's our creator. And in other sorts of schools, something else is being highly honoured. I would say in Catherine Burblesing's school, what's the most highly honoured thing there? It would be multiculturalism. That is the most highly honoured, aimed at a thing that is going on there. Whereas Christ-centered
and academic achievements, and
academic achievement, everything for the sake of learning and development. Whereas Christian schools should be rightly Christ-centered and as places of worship of Jesus Christ, which all of our schools are supposed to be. And I would say that all children are designed, in fact, all people are designed to worship something. Everybody is has this predisposition to honor something above themselves. And there's this worship vacuum that we have in many ways in our schools, which other things come and unhelpfully fill. And what we're seeing in this scenario is an example of that.
And I think I wrote an article about the myth of neutrality in education quite recently. Which,
excellent article.
Covers.
Yeah, and Ben wrote an article about Michaela and that particular issue, which is there in the comments as well if you're following along live. The other thing about that is that, you know, a school has an ethos typically, and it goes with the leadership. And in this school, it has a particular ethos. And when parents send a child to a school, then they are entrusting their children to the people who are running the school and saying, you know, we want this ethos to be taught to our children in some way. And so when you've got now the law courts sort of potentially ruling on whether they can actually uphold their ethos at the Michaela School, you've got essentially the government interfering with parental rights as well. So that's another aspect of this we need to think of when it comes to Christian education, because we want to see Christian schools. Steve works really hard seeing Christian schools develop around the country and trying to help people do that. And you have the potential here of the government sort of butting into where parental rights are involved.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, Paul. Good to see some of the comments coming in and interesting discussions as well, whether we're Christian nation or not. Pratiga, doesn't a ban on Muslim prayer also include a ban on Christian prayer? Great question. I think we discussed some of that earlier. So thank you. Keep bringing your comments and questions in. I think that does get to the point, isn't it, Steve, about, we are worshippers, and there's much to admire about Michaela School. There's much that might be disagreeable. There's a reality that it's okay. We don't need to, I'm sure that there's another school where the Muslim parents can send their children. And as we've been saying, they're trying to, this infiltration, shifting the culture, changing the culture. And it's why we need more Christian schools. Carol Donaldson just commented, apparently more Christian schools are starting up in Scotland, indeed, and in England and Wales. And we do need many, many more Christian schools and Christian teachers and Christians influencing in education and schools. And thank you, Steve.
And Christian home educators.
Well, yes, very good. And what Christians are doing, they're making bold and courageous decisions to not send their children to the local state provision, because they're starting to realize something is worshipped, and the Christian teaching that they're wanting to bring to their children is not being supported. In fact, it's being worked directly against through what is being worshipped inside of the school and the relationship, sex education type stuff. I mean, we've already been commenting that earlier on in the program. That kind of stuff has activated a lot of parents and helped them to realize quite what is being worshipped in other settings. Yeah. And a bold decision to home educate your children, a bold decision to send to an independent Christian school. I admire those that are doing that. And I also admire those Christians who are working in the state system, as I did for 17 years, seeking to also push back against the ideologies that are trying to push into every school, every state school in this country, which should still be having a daily act of Christian worship. So, much work is going on and needs to be continued.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. I think, parents need wisdom, need to be involved, engaging, talking. I think far too often, it was great the advice you gave earlier, talk to your school, ask them, what are they doing? I think far too often we think school's fine, trust them, send the children. Right. We need to be getting involved. If we need to make those bold decisions, then so be it. We trust God. He's faithful. Paul, something else that's been in the news this week as we think about how we live faithfully in the culture that we're in is about whether Christians should attend LGBT weddings. Why has this come up, and what do you think?
So there's been lots of discussion online, particularly on Twitter and in columns in evangelical magazines, these sorts of things, that go back to some comments made by Alistair Begg, who's a long-term minister. He's had 50 years of pastoral ministry. He's got a strong radio ministry. He's been faithful for a very long time in that respect. But a little while ago, he made some comments about the situation where a grandmother asks him, should I attend my grandson's wedding to a trans person? By which I think this means a man marrying another man who believes they're a woman. And his advice basically is, if that couple are really clear, and they know that you are a Christian and you don't go along with what they're doing, if they're really clear about that, then yes, you should go along to that wedding, and you could even take a gift with you and kind of honor them in that way. Now, this is really motivated by a belief in the gospel, because God shows his love to us while we were still sinners. And part of his motivation in giving this advice is saying, hey, look, we should be acting like God, showing amazing grace to people, even when they're abandoning, doing things that are bad for them, in a sense. So I think it's motivated from the best possible place, but I think it's really unwise. I've been writing an article, which hopefully will be out later, about this. But I think one of the most important things about this is that a same-sex wedding or marriage service isn't just an event that you can go to and be a sort of neutral participant in or just observe. It's something where you are called as a member of the congregation to witness and celebrate the love that these people have together. If it's a Church of England type service, and by the way, you can have this sort of wedding in the Church of England right now, where someone has a gender recognition certificate and recognized as being the opposite of what they actually are. You have a marriage service which says something like, in the presence of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we have come together to witness the marriage of N and N, to pray for God's blessing on them, to share their joy and to celebrate their love. So right from the beginning, all the participants are expected to be celebrating what's going on. You're then called to anyone who knows a reason why these people may not lawfully marry should declare it now. How's a Christian going to behave in that moment? How's a Christian going to behave when they're asked, will you, the families and friends of N and N, support and uphold them in their marriage and in the years to come? What is a Christian to do in that situation? And I think that this advice, even if it's possible to navigate those situations, which I think is really unlikely, giving that advice to a grandmother who's not going to be as wise and smart and on their feet as Alistair Begg, who's had 50 years of ministry, I think it's a really dangerous thing to suggest. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Thanks, Paul. I think that is really helpful. I think realizing that it isn't actually a marriage itself, so it's not really a proper wedding, it's not really a real marriage, because I think many are making the comparisons to, say, other religions' weddings and things like that, and I wouldn't be able to comment hugely on what their ceremonies are actually entailing, and as Christians we wouldn't want to participate in acts of worship, but marriage is a creational norm, and so wherever a marriage takes place, it is a real marriage. We don't call a Hindu couple who turn to Christ don't need to get remarried. They are married. But when a homosexual couple turn to Christ, repentance does look like separating. And so it is a very different thing. We're attending and participating, celebrating something which ultimately we're calling them to depart from.
And attendance is endorsement, isn't it? In this, you attend an event like this, which is intended to be a celebration of their wedding. The attendance is endorsement. There's no way around it. Even if it's not even if it's not actually said in words, as Paul implied there, it very often is. Do you know any reason why this should not happen? You are intending, by attending, you're endorsing. If you had a celebration, let's say, of 10 years since gay marriage was legalized, please come to this party. If you go on to that party, you're endorsing, celebrating, legalizing same-sex marriage. That's what you're doing, right? It's the same kind of thing. You go along to same-sex wedding, you're endorsing that same-sex wedding, or that this is something that should be celebrated, when actually it is immorality. What about a polygamous wedding or a polyamorous wedding? Would you attend that? Surely I find it extraordinary that sort of seasoned Christian leaders are suggesting that Christians should go along and celebrate what is actually immorality in actual reality. That it's not a wedding, it's immorality that's being celebrated. And there is no way that Christians throughout the centuries would have ever thought this is anything that any Christian could go along and participate in and endorse by their presence and go along to it. And I think that's extraordinary that some of these Christian leaders have come out and said that.
Yeah,
I think
Carol,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's great to see some of the comments in. Carol Donson, faithful Christians are not being unkind, hypocritical, judgmental, as implied by Alistair Begg. Christians have a responsibility to stand up for righteousness, even if it results in pain, division, or hatred. Great comments there. And again, marriage should be honored by all, but a gay wedding dishonors marriage by perverting its meaning. Absolutely. Steve.
Well, I was going to say, often the arguments around love are used, aren't they? We need to be loving in what we do, and the great passage from St. Paul, not our Paul here, but St. Paul himself, from 1 Corinthians 13, has a beautiful expression of what love is: patient, kind, etc., etc. And it's really clear that it states also, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Other parts of the Bible say, rejoice with those who rejoice. And people think, I'm just going to go along and be a part of a party, like what Tim was saying. It's not just about attending something or connecting something. There's something deeper that's going on with this. It's actually a rejoicing in wrongdoing, because this trans woman being married to a man, it's not actually a man. I'm even confused with my own words about how to talk about what's going on there. By going along and celebrating and rejoicing with that, it's not just about the marriage; it's about rejoicing in the godless and false identity of this person that's being celebrated and promoted. That's a whole nother level of rejoicing in wrongdoing that you would be doing by going along. So, what is the more loving thing in terms of how the Bible defines what love is all about, if love is not rejoicing in wrongdoing? Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing.
But it is rejoicing with the truth is the other half of that verse. So exactly. Just to go back to Carol's comment, I don't think Alistair Begg means in any way to be labeling Christians who don't do this as unloving or unkind in any way. It's his kind of way of trying to say, hey, you could go even further and show this absolutely outrageous kindness by doing this. But what I think it does ultimately is it does set some Christians up to think that maybe they aren't being loving because they're not taking that step. So sometimes Christians will be doing all they can to show that they love someone who they know, who's a friend or family member who is in a same-sex relationship. And they will be doing everything they can, but they will still be estranged and they will be rejected because of their belief in what the Bible says. And I think those people might, by Begg's advice, be feeling like, hang on, should I have done more? They'll be led to question that. And I don't really want Christians to feel like that.
I think there's a real need for pastors to, in one sense, be protecting their congregations by being willing to say these things. I think far too often I hear far more stories of family members who change their position because a family member comes out as LGBT than I do of hearing the other. And the reality is that I think many people feel isolated. They don't want to lose the relationship with their child, and actually they've forgotten who their true family are. Our true family is our church, and our pastors really need to be coming alongside people who are in, having a grandparent being invited to their grandchild's transgender wedding is a heartbreaking situation. And the pastors don't need to, as you said, Paul, be heaping unintentionally, and as you said, Alistair Begg's not saying you're wrong for not going, but as in we need to be shifting the plausibility windows to be saying, no, actually not going is the norm. And actually this is the cost of faithfulness in the culture today. Otherwise, and I think, you could say the same about pronouns or whatever it may be, the tendency is towards, let's encourage accommodation. Let's encourage compromise. Let's encourage, and there are many ways in which we can build bridges. And I don't think anyone's advocating for cutting anyone off and hurling slogans or whatever it may be. We're encouraging, trying to speak the truth in love, and knowing that that's going to be hard. We're not pretending it's easy to do.
But one of the suggestions that I saw on Twitter from our friend Dave Brennan at Brefos was, okay, so don't do that, but why not go all out on celebrating that person's birthday? Give a gift for that. Make sure that they feel as loved as you possibly can at that point. So that the gift and the kindness, the love that you're showing is not connected with that event of this same-sex partnership.
That's good.
we have to agree that, Jesus went to some parties which people thought, why on earth are you going to that party? He was big on bridge building, but this isn't just a party. This is a wedding. This is about a marriage before God, where, as Tim was saying, where you're participating and agreeing and saying, when they say, if anyone believes that there's any reason why these two should not get married, and you don't say anything, then you are forever to hold your peace. This is what a wedding is. It's something entirely different from that. And so, I mean, that's a fantastic suggestion, finding other ways to demonstrate that incredible grace and love of God, and yet we must still bring the truth of God as well.
Of course, Jesus also drove people out of the temple for money changing and these sorts of things. So we can't even take Jesus just as a single example. And one of the things that I think leads to this is actually us not contemplating biblical law enough. What we have had a tendency in kind of evangelical churches to do is to think about the really big aspects of the gospel: God's love, forgiveness, reconciliation, redemption, these sorts of things. We talk about these really big issues and we build all of our spirituality on those, and every sermon has those sorts of big points and is typically a little bit less detailed in the application of something like God's law. And you see evangelical churches spend a lot of time looking through the first 8 chapters of Romans or Ephesians, or kind of books which show the greatness of God's gospel. And that's a good thing to do. But there's not that much reflection on biblical law and the specifics of things. And so I think that you end up with these situations where these pastoral situations come in to this framework, which is this grace heavy, God's love towards us, forgiveness. These are all the big things that chime in our heads. And because we haven't been adequately reflecting on biblical law and other parts of scripture, like, for example, the book of Kings, where you have lots of kings who are celebrated or condemned based on whether they got rid of idols and smashed them up and dealt with the idolatrous priests and took much more radical action rather than sort of the grace and forgiveness sort of route. Because we haven't done the reflection on those sorts of passages and those sorts of commands in scripture, then we just try and kind of come up with our own applications that are just based purely on these bigger principles of love and grace, and we get them wrong. And one of the biggest examples of that is the very facile and sort of simplistic kind of view that God really loves everybody, and therefore anyone can do whatever they think they want to. God is love. Love is love, therefore I'm going to pursue any sexual relationship I want, which we know is completely out of kilter with the rest of the Bible. But it becomes somehow plausible in this framework that's so grace, love, forgiveness heavy that it excludes everything else that's in Scripture.
Wonderful, Paul. That was really helpful in thinking about having that full picture, full counsel of God, the whole counsel of God. God's grace, but also his law, his ways, his paths. And sadly, I think there's probably been a tendency of that for a long time, and it's now becoming and being exposed because of these kinds of issues, when in fact we've probably been making little compromises in a similar way for many, many years before that. Steve, Tim, and Paul, it's been really great to have you on and to talk about these things. And to those who've been joining, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. It's been great seeing your comments and your questions. Don't forget to fill in the consultation on the draft guidance for gender questioning children. Hugely important that we get that involved. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please do like and share, follow, so you get more great content from Christian Concern. Thank you so much, and see you next week on Round the Table.
Thank you.
Thanks.